There was basically an attack by folks in the Democratic leadership, Clyburn. We talked about, I think it was on Friday, the phone call that was leaked and was actually listened to by reporters where Abigail Spanberger and others criticized AOC, the squad, and just the general idea that Democrats would in any way be, I don't know that there's no legislation, there's no policies that have been adopted by the Democrats, but in any way be sympathetic to things like Black Lives Matter, sympathetic to the idea of decreasing police budgets and providing those resources for other organizations and cities to basically make the policy portfolio or the responsibilities of the cops less. Then you had John Kasich goes on television and look, I did not put John Kasich on the DNC and give him as much speaking time as any other Democrat. This is the problem that comes with highlighting and promoting things like Project Lincoln. Of course, the Republicans got more votes than they did last time. There's no evidence that Project Lincoln changed a single person's vote or John Kasich changed a single person's vote. But somehow John Kasich, a lifelong Republican, former Fox host, former and maybe current, frankly, Wall Street guy, is out there, and now he's explaining what the Democrats have to do. Clip number 10.
Now is the time for Democrats, and I believe Joe Biden will do this, to begin to listen to what the other half of the country has had to say. But we have to listen to what those folks, those Republicans all across this country has had to say. The best thing that's happened to Joe Biden is the fact that the United States Senate is either going to be Republican or very close, and the far left can push him as hard as they want. And frankly, the Democrats have to make it clear to the far left that they almost cost him this election. And that congresswoman from Virginia warned the Democrats, you want to talk about defunding the police, you'll have no support. And I think this is an opportunity for Biden to talk about the center right and the center left of this country and what can be achieved. Because we have enormous problems with debt, Social Security, Medicare, health care. Little steps, little steps. One other thing, one Democrat told me at some point, if they'd have been more clear in rejecting the hard left, they would have appealed more to Americans who I believe essentially live in the middle. So I think actually he's in a better position today because being pulled from the left isn't going to work. They will not get those things done.
This is, first off, understand that when John Kasich says we have debt and we've got to deal with Medicare and Social Security, he is talking about cutting those. The two most popular programs in the entire country. The staple of that has been basically keeping Democrats in the game to the extent that they're in the game for almost 100 years. That should be enough to discount John Kasich. Period. End of story. But the idea that the Democrats were in any way inhibited by these policies, there's just no evidence of it. Zero evidence. If Joe Biden, first of all, there was no Democrats out there who didn't have enough resources. No moderate Democrats, for sure. No centrist Democrats. No Republican-leaning Democrats who didn't have the resources to push back on false narratives, if that's what they wanted to do. Joe Biden was able to do it. They could have done it. But the fascinating thing is that AOC was interviewed by the New York Times. And what she had to say is being completely mischaracterized. And it's fascinating to watch this. She gave a critique. And one of the things that I've been, I've always said about AOC is that there are two elements about her that are particularly hopeful in my mind. And one is her ideology. She is full-throated in her support for things like Green New Deal, things like Medicare for all, et cetera, et cetera. But even if you put aside ideological differences that people might have, and even if you want to argue that, well, she is in a district that is made up of something like 70% working class folks and 80% people of color, even if your argument is that those policies won't sell in other locations, I don't know what those locations might be or why they're necessary for Democrats to win. And even if you also wanted to say, like, well, I mean, the fact that they would elect her over Joe Crowley and also elect her and fend off her challenge significantly may be indicative of a dynamic that, things didn't change that much in 2 years in her district. It could be just that people have been holding power and not providing what their constituents actually want. But putting that aside from an ideological perspective, her critique of the Democratic Party is not an ideological one, at least in the context of these elections. Her critique of the Democratic Party is that their failure to exercise best practices and to do politics correctly. Remember, the DCCC punished a lot of organizations that worked with primary people. And so they ended up essentially blacklisting some of the best for-profit political firms, the ones that have the best sense of how to motivate voters, how to communicate with voters on particularly on digital platforms. And what she's saying, if you read this New York Times interview, and this is what she's saying. She's saying two things. One, quote, "We also learned that progressive policies do not hurt candidates." She's not suggesting that it is a panacea to adopt Medicare for all. She is simply saying they don't hurt candidates. Every single candidate that co-sponsored Medicare for all in a swing district kept their seat. Now, again, co-sponsoring, you just sign up for it. It's not like you run on it necessarily, but that means it's not a liability. We also know that co-sponsoring the Green New Deal was not a sinker. Mike Levin was an original co-sponsor of the legislation. He kept his seat. In other words, if you think you support a policy that is the right policy, but you are worried that it's a liability, we have proof now that it's not a liability. It may not be a panacea. It may not make you win your district, but it shouldn't be an inhibition to you winning that district. She goes on to say, "I've been starting to look into actual functioning of these campaigns." So she's shifting here. It is now about the mechanics of actually politicking. The thing is, I've been unseating Democrats for 2 years. She's been working with Justice Democrats. I have been defeating Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee-run campaigns for 2 years. That's how I got to Congress. That's how we elected Ayanna Pressley. That's how Jamal Bowman won. That's how Cori Bush won. And so we know about extreme vulnerabilities in how Democrats run campaigns. She is now speaking as a campaign runner. This is not an ideological issue for her. Some of this is criminal. It's malpractice. Connor Lamb spent $2,000 on Facebook the week before the election. I don't think anybody who's not on the internet in a real way in the year of our Lord 2020 and loses an election can blame anyone else when they're not really on the internet. And she says, if the fact of the matter is you're not spending $200,000 on Facebook with fundraising, persuasion, volunteer recruitment, get out the vote the week before the election, you are not firing on all cylinders. And not a single one of these campaigns were firing on all cylinders. She is criticizing the Democrats for political malpractice, not on ideological grounds. These folks are pointing toward Republican messaging. They feel killed them, right? But why were you so vulnerable to that attack? If you're not door knocking, if you're not on the internet, if your main points of reliance are TV and mail, you're not running a campaign on all cylinders. I just don't see how anyone could be making ideological claims when they didn't run a full-fledged campaign. Here's the dirty little secret, folks. If your campaign buys a lot of ads, if your campaign buys a lot of mailers, your campaign consultants, your advisors, they make a ton of money. If your campaign goes and knocks on a bunch of doors, if your campaign buys a bunch of ads on Facebook, you do not make a ton of money. When you buy TV ads, you as an advisor, you get 15% off the top. A lot of times you're buying ads from your own agency that is an outside agency, that is yours or your partner's. What she is talking about is a sclerotic Democratic Party that is running campaigns that may or may not have been successful years ago, decades ago. And they're continuing to do so because people are making money off of it. And they're in the position of making those decisions.
Did you see Connor Lamb responded saying AOC doesn't know what she's talking about? This is what Tim Tagara says. He says she doesn't have any idea how we ran the campaign or what we spent, but it's public. He may not have known that. He spent $8,000 in the last month and $1,331 in the last 4 days. So
That's right. He came out. He was interviewed. He did not deny that he spent so little on Facebook. He doesn't even realize that information is public. Tim Takaris was Bernie Sanders' was his digital fundraiser. So what we're dealing with is a Democratic establishment. There's an ideological argument to this, but put that aside for a moment. We're dealing with a Democratic establishment that has become ossified. Ossified? Help me out here, Matt. That has become
that's right.
ossified. And they continue to rely on a model of running campaigns that is failing over and over again and is being maintained only because those people in the positions of making these decisions are making a lot of money off it. We will have more to say on this in the coming days.